Hello guys, this is Tafatzwa from StackDev and welcome to my YouTube course. In this tutorial, we are going to learn how to create a secure and well-tested Django Restful API. So this tutorial I have divided into 3 sections. The first section, you are going to learn how to create a Django Restful API. And in the second section, you are going to learn how to secure the API. And lastly, you'll learn how to create some REST API unit testing. So in the first section, you are going to learn how to use the Django REST framework, which is essentially a powerful and most flexible toolkit for building web APIs. So one of the advantages of using the Django REST framework is it comes with some authentication policies, which allows you to make some secure or to apply some security on your endpoints. And also it comes with serialization, which you guys are going to also to learn, which supports both the ORM and the non-ORM data sources. So what this means is the Django basically it comes with with a powerful feature or with a powerful tool, which is called Object Relational Mapper, which is essentially what I just said, ORM, which actually enables us to actually go ahead and interact with the database, like what you do, for example, using the SQL. But in this case, you'll be using some, some commands or some methods that comes with the Django ORM. So using the REST framework, you actually go ahead and you have this feature where the ORM will be actually linked to the REST framework. You also learn how to create some REST CRUD features. For example, you're going to learn how you can actually go ahead and create some read, update, and delete requests. Then in the second section, you're going to learn how you can actually go ahead and secure your Django RESTful API using Django REST Framework-SimpleJWT, where JWT simply stands for JSON Web Tokens. So in this case, or in this tutorial, we are going to learn how you can actually go ahead and secure your endpoints using REST token authentication, where we'll be doing some signing of our tokens or some signing of our requests, and actually go ahead and secure those endpoints using JSON Web Tokens. Then in the last section, we're going to learn how you can actually go ahead and do your API unit testing. So in this particular section, you're going to learn how you can actually go ahead and do your unit testing using the APITestCase, which also comes with the API client. So stay tuned and enjoy the rest of the video. Cheers. Alright, now let's get started. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that you have your feature environment activated. So in my particular case, I'm using pip-env. So to activate my feature environment, I can say pip-env shell. Then it will actually go ahead and activate my feature environment. So depending on your choice of feature environment you want to use, you can use virtual env or anything or any virtual environment of your choice. So in this case, I'm using pip-env. So the next thing after you have activated the feature environment is to install Django. So you can simply go ahead and install your Django, pip install Django, right? Then this will install the latest version of the Django application, depending on which Python version that you are running. So in this case, I'm running Python 3, so it will probably install the Django 3 version. So I'm not going to run this command because I've already installed Django. So once you have installed Django, you can actually go ahead and check the version of a Django that you are using. So in this case, I'm using Django 3.2.4. all right. So once you have installed Django, the next thing that you need to do is you need to start your project or to create your application. So to start your project, you simply go ahead and type Django admin, then start project. So the name of my project, I'm going to call it secure tested Django and API, like so. So what this command does is it actually go ahead and and start a project called secure tested Django. So let's simply go ahead and navigate to the folder that we just created, right? So once I have navigated to the folder, then I'll open my VS Code in this specific folder. So once you are now in this folder, you can actually see that it has created the basic boilerplate code for our project. So basically it will have another folder called secure Django API with the settings file, the URLs, and the WSG. So basically this is the basic structure of the files. And outside that folder, it has this manage.py file, so you don't alter this file whatsoever, particularly for this tutorial anyway. So once you have your structure ready, the next thing that you need to do is you probably need to install a couple of dependencies. So let's quickly install the Django REST framework. So just type pip install Django REST framework. So this is a third-party package that we're simply going to use to install to create our API, right? Django REST framework is one word like this. So once you have installed this, so I'm not going to install it because I've already installed it in my system. The next package that you need to install is Django REST framework SimpleJWT, like so. So then you install this one. So this is the one that we'll be using for our JSON web tokens and such, right? So once you have installed these two packages, I think it's probably time for us to actually go ahead and implement our API. So basically the API that we're going to create is we're simply going to create a business API where you are simply going to perform some CRUD functionalities to the API, like what I've mentioned earlier. We are simply going to perform the the create, the read, your update, and your delete requests onto the API. So to do that, we need to create an entity or a table, in this case a model, right? So what you're going to do here is, first of all, you need to wrap that around inside an application, right? So the first thing that you need to do is you need to create a new application. So in my case, I'm simply going to create a new application called business, like so, right? So you say manage.py startup business, right? So it will create a new application, right? So inside this new application, you actually see that it has the migrations, it has the admin, the models, the views. So all our models or all our entities that we're going to implement, we'll be implementing them inside this models file, then the tests and etc. right? So some of these things, I think we'll look at them as we go on, right? So rule of thumb, each and every time you create an application, right, if you want it to be used by other things, you simply go ahead to you need to go to the settings .py file and then add that application under installed application, right? So here we simply go ahead and add the business app, right, that we just created under the installed apps inside the settings.py, right? So there's a new change, then you save, right? So once you have done that, the next thing that we probably need to do here is we need to actually go ahead and create our models, right? So the model that we're going to create is simply going to be called a customer. So let's simply go ahead to the business application under models, right? So inside the models, there is nothing here except for the import for the models, right? So now let's create our entity. So the entity that we're going to create is going to be called customer, and then it's going to extend from the model class, right? Like this, right? So once you've done this, this entity or this table is probably going to have some fields, right? So the fields that we're going to have title, then we take it from the models dot, it's a character, so car field has a string, then it takes car field takes maximum length, right, of 250, right? So this is a string of maximum length 250, like what you do in other languages for car 250, right? Then we need to create some more fields. So we're going to have the name, right, the last name, right, then the gender, right? So for the gender, I'm not going to do it as a, you know, as a string, but it's going to be a string, but basically I needed to have some sort of, like, you know, in Java you call it enumerations, where you can actually go ahead and declare some status, some choices, right? So this is going to have a maximum length of an ID, let's say of 10. Then I'm simply going to implement something called choices here, which means this is going to be a gender choices, because for gender we probably need, you know, to know the gender of that specific individual, be it they're male, females, bisexual, etc. So here we're simply going to say gender choices, right? So for this gender choices here, the way you implement it in Django is going to be a tuple. So it's going to be a tuple of tuples, right? So here I'm simply going to now put the fields. This is M for male, like this, right? Then the next one, let's say female, right? Then the next one, we can say, let's say intersex. Yep. Intersex, like this, right? So this is how you implement the choices fields in Django, right? So you simply put the keyword choices, then you implement your choices as a tuple. So this is going to be a tuple of tuples, right? So once you have gender out of the way, then you need created by, right? So we need to know who actually created this entity, right? So for example, if it's being created via the Django admin or via an API, we need to know who created it, right? The user would have created it, right? So we simply make use of the foreign key now, right? So we're simply going to say models. This is how we implement a foreign key in Django, right? Foreign key, like so, right? Then inside this foreign key, we need to know the entity name that you want to reference to. So in this case, we want to reference the user, so we need to import the user, right? So we are going to say from Django contrib AUTH models import user, like this, right? So this user, we are going to later on create a super user that we're going to use, right? So this is the user that we're going to create. So any type of user, so in this case we're simply going to create one user. So this is the user that we're going to use, right? So this user, this foreign key is going to have a related name, right? So for the related name, I can call it, let's say created, I can say created by, right? Like this. And then it's also probably going to have on delete, right? So, you know, like for each and every time you create a foreign key, you need to put, you know, like for example, on delete cascade, right? But in this case, I'm not going to say cascade, because I want to say each and every time a user is deleted, I don't want to actually go ahead and delete this entity, this customer entity. So I'm going to use models dot there's a keyword called protected, right? So which means if we delete our user, right? If we delete a user, we don't want it to actually go ahead and delete this customer as well, right? So you put protected. Then this one is going to, by default, is going to reference to user 1, so default 1, like so, right? So the reason why I'm actually doing this, I'm creating these many fields, is I want you guys to be familiar with the data types that you can actually have when creating our entities in Django, right? So the next data type that maybe we can look at is maybe created, right? We need to know when this model was created, so we're simply going to say models dot, right? So in this case, for the created, it's going to be a date time field, like so. Then by default, because we don't want to alter this, we want this to be automatically done, so I can say time zone dot now, right? But we probably need to import time zone, right? So to import the time zone, you can simply go ahead and import it from Django utils. So we can say from Django utils import, then time zone, right? Time zone, like this. All right. So once you have this one ready, the next one that we need is a status, right? right? Because each and every time we create this entity, we want to be able to have an option to actually go ahead and publish it so that it can be viewed, be it by our API or the front end or etc. or not, right? So we want it to have a status choices here. So here under choices, I'm going to say status choices like so. So the reason why I'm going to do this is, I think you'll see later on. So let's finish up. So let's say by default I want it to be a draft, right? So for the status choices, we're going to have two choices, whether this is a draft customer, or maybe this is a published customer, something like that, as a status choice, right? So for my status choices, I'm going to implement them here, right? It's going to be a tuple of tuples again. So here I'm simply going, the first one is going to be a draft as a keyword. So here you can actually go ahead and use, you know, IDs like numbers like 1 2 3 4 5, it doesn't matter, but in this case I'm simply using this text so that it becomes more descriptive, right? So then published like this. All right, published like this. So now that we have our status ready, right, you'll see why we have created this status shortly, right? So the next thing that we probably need to do here is, for each and every time you create an entity in Django, you need to implement your manager. So Django actually uses an objects manager by default. So you simply say objects is equals to models, right, dot manager like so. So what this does is the manager allows you to actually go ahead. It's part of the ORM. It actually allows you to actually go ahead and interact with your table or with your database, or to make queries on your database. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you want to select everything from customer. For example, the SQL will be select all from customer. But if you now want to do it with the Django or ORM using the objects manager, you simply go ahead and say customer, right, dot objects like so dot all, right? So this is how you do it if you want to say select all from customers, right? So this is how you do it in Django using the objects manager, right? So this is basically essentially how the manager helps us. So each and every time you implement a model, you need to make sure that you have implemented this objects manager like so, right? Because it actually helps us to do other queries. For example, select all, or with the where clauses, it actually uses the filters and stuff like that, right? So now let's say now you want to make a customized select query. Let's say you want to do something like select all from customer, right? Select all from customer where the status, we have a status field here where status is equals to published, right? So the way you do it using the objects manager, you do something like this. You say customer dot objects dot filter, then status is equal to, then published like so. So this is how you do it if you want to say select all from customer where status is equal to published, right? So this is how you do it. So probably this will be doing it maybe inside the views of your API or something like that, if you want to interact with this customer entity. But Django, with this manager feature, Django allows us to alter the behavior of this feature of this models manager. So let's say you want to create your own custom manager that does something like this, so that in future, instead of doing this, you'll be doing, let's say, something like this. You can say customer dot published dot all, right? So we want to be able to create a published manager that does something like this, so that instead of writing this long query, you can actually go ahead and shorten it using customer.publish.all. So the way you can do this, right, the way you can, so let me comment this out. So the way you can do this is Django allows you to implement your own custom managers, right? So the way I'm going to implement mine, right, in this case, right, I'm going to call it published like this. Then I'm simply going to say published manager like so, right? So this published manager is a class that we need to actually go ahead and implement, so that we'll be able to do something like customer.published.all instead of this, right? So let's go ahead and implement this published manager. right? So this published manager, I'm simply going to implement it here at the top. So I'm simply going to say published manager, right? So what published, for you to be able to create the published manager, you need to extend the models manager, right? Like so, right? So what this does here is you now have access to all the functions and functionality inside our models manager, right? So let's do a composition here. So we're simply going to say you create a function called get query set, get query set like this. Then since it's inside a class, you need to put self inside the function. Then you simply return, right, super, right? So we now want to pass our published manager inside the super manager class, right? Then self, like so. Then once you've done that, then we now want to use the super class get query set. So we can simply say get query, like what we did here, get query set. So this allows us to do some sort of like a composition to our super class. Get query set filter, right? Status is equals to published, right? So basically what this does is it actually do the same job like what I've explained here, to say customer.objects filter status is equals to. So now the one advantage of doing this is, now instead of you having to do it on all the views that will be implementing maybe in other apps, to say customer.filter.whatever, you can actually go ahead and implement it once off inside your model here. So as you can see, we have implemented our own custom manager called published manager. That does the same job. So in this case, if you want to get if you want to select all customer where status is equals to published, you simply go ahead and run this query customer.published.o, like so. So this is how you implement your custom managers. All right, so now let's move on. So probably the last steps that we now need to do here is we now want to implement maybe our meta classes, right? So just like Python, Django also comes with meta classes that allows us to alter the behavior of our classes or of our functions and stuff like that. So in this case in Django, right? So by default Django, if you don't provide something called verbose name, right? It will in the Django admin. So for example, okay, so let me just type the code out, then I'll explain. Then we want to have something called verbose plural for plural. So how we are going to call this customer entity, right? It's going to, for the plural name, is going to be customers, right? So if you don't implement the verbose name and the verbose plural is at your Django admin, right, at the backend, when you actually logs into a Django admin and view your entity, because later on we're going to re-register this customer entity in the admin class, in the admin file. So if you don't put the verbose name plural, what Django does is every time you create a customer, it will put something like this, like say customers, like this. Or maybe, okay, so in this case it's called customer, so maybe it will be customers. But let's say this entity name was customers, right? So at the backend it will put another S like this. It will just assume that you need the plural name for the entities or something like that. So you need to make sure that you implement your verbose plural to actually change this behavior, right? So that's it in our meta class. Then the last thing that we now need to do is we now need to put our toString method or our wrapper or representation of our class, right? So you can use string or you can use the Danda wrapper. Yeah, but in this case I'm going to use the toString. Right, so the toString method, my object, I'm going to represent it with the name and probably the surname, like so. So I'm simply going to say name, surname, right? So I'm simply going to say name, right? Then dot format, right? Then I pull out the instance of the name here, then the instance of the last name, like so, right? So once you have done this, now you have our toString method. So each and every time I print this customer object, it will show me the name and the same of that specific class or that specific individual, right? So this is how we do it. So the next thing that we probably need to do now is we now want to implement to register our model inside the Django admin. So let's go to the admin file, right? So the first thing that we need to do here is you need to declare a class, let's say called customer admin, right? That this is the name of, right? This is the name of my class. Then it's going to extend the admin, then model admin, so right. Then inside this Django admin page, I'm going to have a list display, which is going to display the fields that we have. So we have the title, we have the full name, right? So with this full name, I'll show you how you can actually go ahead and concatenate two fields into one using our own custom method here. Then we're going to have created by, right? Then we can actually have created, so that we know when this was created, and maybe probably we can have the status as well, right? So once we have your list display, so the list display, what it does is it actually displays the data in your Django admin. So when you open the customer entity, if it has data, then it will show you these fields as the headers, right? Then we can actually go ahead and have a read only, right? Read only fields, right, in our Django model. So let's say if you want to create maybe a specific entity, in that particular case, we don't want people to alter the created, because we want it to be automatically be done by the system, since we already have put a default in our created here. We said git default timestamp, time zone now, right? So which means each and every time this one is going to be read only, so we won't be allowed to alter it in your Django admin. Then the last thing that we need to do is we now want to actually define this function, right? Called full name, right? So the way you do it here is, since we assign a class, you put self, then you use this object, right? This object keyword, right? So what this does is the name of your field is supposed to be the name of your function. So here we simply want to concatenate these two. So we simply want to say return object dot, right, dot name plus, we are now concatenating, we put a space because we need the name and the surname, object dot last name. So this is how you concatenate fields inside your Django admin, right? So once you have done this, the last thing that you need to do is you now want to register your model inside the Django admin. So here inside the register function, you pass the customer, and then you pass the name of your admin class, like so. So this is how you do it, right? So after you've done this, you have successfully registered your entity inside the Django admin, right? So after this stage, you can actually go ahead and test it out and make your migrations and just make sure that everything is working. So I'm simply going to say make migrations, like so. Gender choices is not defined. Okay, so inside gender choices, okay, so I forgot an equal sign here, right? It's supposed to be a list of a tuple of tuples, all right? So let's try it. Here's no attribute protected. What is it saying? Django models, here's no attribute protected. Okay, so it's not supposed to be protected. Okay, it's supposed to be only protect, like this. Yep, protect, not protected. Okay, that was my bad. Sorry about that, guys. Name customer is not defined. All right, so inside my Django admin, I forgot to import the customer. So we're going to say from Django models, from this business models import, then we need to import the customer like this, right? So make sure you make your imports, because if you don't, then you probably have these choices must be alterable containing actual values. What's going on here? All right, so after a little time of debugging on this error, I think I'd forgot to put a comma here inside my gender choices here. All right, so now let's retry, make migrations. All right, so now it's not working. So after we have done this, then you probably notice that if you go to the business model, right, it has made the migrations. So basically what a migration file, I'm not going to dig deep into this, but basically it's just a blueprint of our entity that is going to be written to our database, or that is going to be created as a table. So basically this is the blueprint of our table, right, as a migration file. So once you have made the migration, the last thing that you need to do is to migrate, right? So if you run your migrate query, it will then apply the migrations, or rather create the actual entity inside your database, right? So after this stage, it has created the database, right? Then the next thing that we probably need to do, since now we have our entity ready, our business entity ready, we now want to write the API to it, right? So to actually create the API, the next thing that we probably need to do here is we need to create an API application, right? So to do that, we simply go ahead and say start app, manage.py, start app, then API. Right, so inside this API, this is where we're going to implement our endpoints, right? Basically, we're going to implement all of our endpoints here. Then as rule of thumb, remember, you need to include the API new application inside the installed apps like this, right? So once you have done this, right, we now want to implement our CRUD functionalities for our API, right? So the first thing that you probably need to do here is, if you go to secure tested Django API, right, there is a urls.py file, right? So what this URL does here is, by default, it only has this admin path, right? So which means if I do something like this, if I run my server, right, if I say manage.py run server, then if I go to localhost 8000, is if I put /admin, it's supposed to redirect me to the admin tab, right? I'm not going to do that now because we want to focus more on creating the API. We'll do the testing later shortly, right? It's supposed to show you that, right? Then, so what we want to do here is we want to be able to make requests, or to create a path that are going to follow a slash. So we have the domain name localhost 8000, then /API, then everything that is going to come after that, then we need to actually go ahead and create the endpoints for that. So in this case, so for example, what I mean here is, for example, let's say you have a domain name localhost let's say 8000, right, / we want to have something like /API, maybe /customers, like so, to get the customers, or /ID to get a customer with a specific ID and stuff like that, right? So these are the endpoints that we're going to create inside the API app. But for the entry point now, after the localhost, we need to define all the entry points of our apps for the URLs inside this main urls.py file inside this secure tested folder, right? So this is where we want to create, right? So in this case, I'm simply going to say all traffic that is going to come under /API, I need them to actually be redirected inside the API app.urls. Right, so inside the API app, I'm going to have the urls.py, just like we have here inside the secure. So the first thing that we need to do here is we need to import this include, because we don't have it here. So from Django urls import include, like so, right? So once you have done that, then you can actually go ahead and save, right? Then you navigate to your API folder, which is this one. As you can see, each and every time you create an app, the urls.py file is not available except for this default one inside the secure tested app, right? So which means we need to create that file here. So to create the file here, you can simply go ahead and create your urls.py. All right, I've created a urls.py file inside of this API app, right? So what I need to do here is I need to import a couple of things. So I need to import from Django.urls, then I need to import the path so that I'll be able to create my path. Then from path, then from Django, not Django as such, but from, all right, so for now let's start with this, right? So we're going to have something called url patterns, right, which is going to be a list of our path, right? So we're going to create our path now, right? So the path that we're going to create is, remember, we have /API, like in my demonstration I said /API, then / then customers, right? So if our user hits customers like this, right, customers, I want them to be actually able to get all customers, all published customers in this, right? So which means this is the URL, right? Then inside this path, right, you can actually go ahead, because where do you want this view to be actioned, or where do you want this API to be further defined, right? So we want this API to be further defined in a file, in a views file. So inside our views, this is where we create all our logic in terms of the endpoints that are going to be hit by our URLs, right? So if our client is the customer, what we're simply going to do here, we're simply going to say API views, right, dot like this, then customer view dot customer view dot as, since this is going to be a class, as view like this, right? So this API views, what is it, right? So let's import it here. So we're going to say from API, our app, right, import, right, import views, right? So from our API app, we want to import views. So here, this is where we're going to create all of our views in terms of the endpoints that are going to be hit. So from all of our views, right, import from the API app, import views as API underscore views, like so. So this is just a name, right? So like this, so that we can actually go ahead and say, okay, views, then it will give us access to all the classes and functions that are defined inside this API views app dot customer view as view. Then we can simply go ahead and give it a name, because we use it later on when you now want to resolve this URL. So this name is called customer, which means this path, right, it has a name called customer. This name we use it later on, you'll see when we use it, right? So now that we have created our first endpoint, we need to implement this customer view. What is it? Now let's go ahead and implement it. So inside the views app, right, we need to actually go ahead and implement the customer view. So what we're simply going to do here, we're simply going to say class customer view, then it's going to inherit from API view like this. So this is where our Django REST framework starts, right? So what you want to do here is we're going to say from REST framework. Remember, we installed a REST framework package, right? REST framework, from REST framework dot views import API view, right, like this. So this is the API view that we're importing. So for now, what I need to do here, let me just simply say pass. There's a couple of things that we need to do, right? So the first thing, since we are now using this REST framework, right, remember inside our settings.py file under installed apps, we don't have a RESTful, we didn't import this new package here, so we need to import it under the installed apps, right? So the way you do it, right, you can simply go ahead and import it anyway, right? So here we're going to say REST framework, because if you don't import it, right, when you try to run an application, you need to complain to say it can't recognize this package because it's nowhere inside the application. So you need to tell Django that this REST framework is supposed to be used and imported under the installed apps, right? So before I do anything, let me simply run my server here. So manage py run server, right? Boom, like so. Right, so the reason why I'm running the server is I want to be able to pick some errors. So for example, if I save a file, I need to be able to pick some errors, be it I have some import errors or any other errors. So I need to be able to pick those errors, right? So once you have done this, right, the next thing that we need to do here is we want to implement our GET request. Remember, we're implementing a CRUD, so we can simply go ahead. So inside the API view, it comes with a GET, right, with a GET request, right? Since inside the function we give it a self, then it has a request, then we can put format is equals to none, right? So inside this get request, what do you want to do? What do I want to do? I want to select all customers whose status is equals to published. So let's do it. So I'm going to create a variable called customers, right? Then I'm going to say customers dot. So remember, I hadn't imported the customer model. So let's import it. So from business, the application called business.models, right? Import, right? I need to import the entity like so that we'll be able to do some ORM, right? Object relational mapper, or sweet spot for Django. So we're going to say customer.published.all, right? Perfect. So what this does is it's actually run the query select all from customer where status is also published. That's all. So instead of doing customers.all, so instead of doing customers dot objects dot all dot filter status. So this is a lot of code. Status is also published. You get the point. So we simply use our own custom manager. So it's now coming in handy, right? So what this does is this returns our lists of our objects, but these lists of objects, they are not serialized, right? Because by default the Django doesn't serialize it for you. So which means you need to actually find a way to actually go ahead and serialize it so that they will be able to be passed on the browser as a JSON object or as a list or as JSONable data, right? So which means you need to serialize it, right? So to serialize it, right, what we're simply going to do here, we're simply going to say serializer, right, is equals to customer serializer. So which means for our customer entity, we're going to create a serializer called customer serializer, right? So this is where the REST framework comes into play. So here we're simply going to pass customers, right? These customers, right? This object that is going to return a list of our customers objects, but they are not serializable, so we need to serialize them. So we need to pass them inside this customer serializer. So this customer serializer class will create it shortly. Then we need to pass many is equal to true. So the reason why we're passing many is equal to true to our customer serializer is because since it's going to return more than one object, it's going to return a list of objects, we need to pass many is equal to true. Because if you don't pass many is equal to true, our REST framework serializer is going to assume that we are simply going to return one object, right? Then after you have done this, then the last thing that you need to do, you now have your serialized object, then you need to pass the response, right? So the response that we're going to pass is we're going to take it from the REST framework again. So from REST framework dot response is the correct spelling, import response, like so. All right, so this is the response, right? So inside this response, right, you simply go ahead and pass your serializer, then dot data. So this data will be JSON serialized, which means you can actually go ahead and pass it over the browser so that it can be consumed by other apps, right? So now we have this customer serializer. How do we actually go ahead and work with this customer serializer, right? So it's very, very simple. So inside the API, right, app, right, we need to create a file, right? Let's create a new file called serializers.py, right? So which means for all our serializers that we're going to create them inside of what? We're going to create them inside of this serializers class, right? So in this case, what we need to do here is we need to define our customer serializer. So we simply say, so the first thing that we need to do, we need to import the serializer from the REST framework. So we'll simply go ahead and say from REST, right? So remember, earlier on in the beginning of the tutorial, I said that the Django Restful framework allows us to work with, allows us to serialize our data in a way that is amazing. You won't have to do a whole bunch of code to serialize, right? So, and also we need to import our model because we need to use it as well here, because we want to actually go ahead and serialize the customer model. So we need to import it, right? So import, right? Then import customer, right? So how do you make this serialize? So you simply say customer serializer, right? So the customer serializer, you need to extend the serializers from the model, the model serializer class, right? Serializer like this, right? I've been saying serializer a lot. This sounds now sounding like I'm saying serial killer or something. All right. So inside this serializer, so you simply need to implement your meta class. You don't want to do much inside this one, but in this case, I'm simply going to implement the meta class. Then I'll simply tell the meta class which model we are working with. So the model that we're working with is called customer. Then the fields that I want to serialize is I want to serialize everything, the ID and everything. So I just want to serialize the whole customer object like so. So this is how we do it. So simple. Right, so from this stage, you can see that it's now easier. Our serializer is now ready. So now let's go ahead and import this serializer. So from this stage, you would have serialized your customer object. So now let's go back here. We have this customer serializer. So now what you want to do here is you want to import, you want to probably import this customer serializer. So what we're going to do here under response, or under the customer, or at the far end here, we're going to say from API.serializers import customer serializer. Boom, like this, and we are done. All right. So once this is ready, I think for the most part, I think our API is ready. So what is it saying? REST framework is not found. All right, so from REST framework here, response like so. Right, so this is our GET request. So for our GET request, I think it's now ready. So let me open a new terminal and try to fire a GET request. So inside my GET request, I'm simply going to say cal http local http localhost 8000 /API /customers boom. What's wrong with my HTTP? Boom, right? So as you can see, since we don't have anything, it's returning an empty list, right? So which means our serializer is working as of now. There are no errors, right? So this is for GET request. So this will get the list of our users, right? Then the next one that I probably want to do is the post request. So if our customer make a post request to this same endpoint /customers, what do we want to do? So we're simply passing this self, then the request, and then the format is equal to none. Right, so what do we want to do with this one? Right, so now let's start by serializing the data that is coming from our client, right? So we're simply going to say customer serializer. We have created the serializer. Then the data that we want to serialize is the request.data. Because remember, when you make a post request, you need to pass your data object, right? So this is what we want to to serialize. So now let's do some checking. So if serializer, right, what we have serialized is valid, right? So these are some of the handy functions that comes with the Django REST framework serializer. So if this is valid, then we simply want to save serializer.save, right? So you can see these are posts insert into database. So the serializer, like what I've said, it works pretty well with the Django ORM, right? Which means you don't have to worry about the queries. Everything is being done for you. You just need to implement the methods that are available, right? So we are saying if the serializer, if the data that has been passed is valid, then let's actually go ahead and save the object, and then we return a response to our client. So the response that we want to return to them is we simply want to return the data that they've posted, and then the status created, right? Then the status is equals to status.created. So for the status, I'm simply going to say from, I need to import status from REST framework, import status, right? So from REST framework, import status, right? So what I'm simply going to do here is I'm simply going to say status, then the status that we've imported dot http underscore 201, that's the status for created underscore then created, right? So now the user you've got the data. Then lastly, if there's an error, right? If there's an error, what do we want to do? If there's an error, we simply want to return the error. So we're going to say serializers.errors, like so. Then we pass the status as status dot http, let's say 400. Then we say bed request, like so. All right, so these statuses, they are coming from the Django REST framework. I'm not just putting them. This, if you look in the documentation, you see all the status that are available. So after you've done this, then our post request should be now ready, right? So now let's quickly go ahead and implement the other view. So navigate to the URLs.py, right? So under the customers path, let's create another one. So this one that we're going to create now is going to handle our get single element, post, our put request, and then our delete request. So the endpoint is going to be customers, right? But the difference in this one is we're going to have to pass an ID. So we're going to pass an integer with a variable called primary key, like so. So we're going to say customers, then the API views dot, then this one we're going to call it customer detail view, right? Then as underscore view, like so. Then the name of this one, we're simply going to call it customer detail, right? So once this one is ready, you can actually go ahead and save this. Now we need to implement this customer detail view, right? So go back to the views, right? Then under here, now let's implement it. So this one is going to extend the API view, right? Like what I've done before, right? So the first thing that we need to do here is we want to get the single element, right? So let's implement our get request. So def get, we pass the self, and then we'll pass the requests, right? Since we are passing a primary key as a data, as a parameter, we simply pass the parameter, then we can say format is equal to none, right? So inside this one, what we want to do here is we want to say customer, we want to say the single customer that we're going to get is going to say customer dot published. So we want to get the published customer dot get with the primary key is equal to the primary key, right? So one thing that you have to notice about this, right? So each and every time you make a get request by a single element, right? So let's say this this data is not available, right? So if this is not available, what then happens is the RESTful framework will actually respond with an error saying you're trying to query a model whose data is not available. So how do we handle this? So we're going to simply go ahead and handle this by implementing some try catch here. So here you can say try, right? Then you can try this, right? Then if this is not available, then you can put your accept or maybe your response saying this data is not available. But one thing with now this is because inside this view we're also going to implement our things like the put requests. Then the put request is also going to have the same parameter. It's going to take the primary key, it's going to take a parameter as well, right? Then we need to do try catch again for this one, and etc. Right? So one thing that you can one problem with this kind of code is it has a lot of bottlenecks, right? So which means we are wasting resources to somewhat. So one thing that not wasting resources rather, but it won't be readable, it won't be clean code, right? So it won't advocate for clean code. So one thing that you can actually handle this issue of putting some try and catch is you can actually go ahead and implement a function that actually does the checking for you, then implement it in all these, right? So this works just fine, but with functions I think they will do the job fine. But maybe the best analogy to do this is to implement a decorator, right? A Python decorator. So basically what a decorator does is it actually allows you to alter the behavior of a function, of a class when it is being run. So which means if you're running a function, you can actually go ahead and alter the behavior by putting other functionality code in between the function while the function is still running, right? So decorator is actually a design pattern that Python implement, right? So with our decorator, simply a decorator is simply a function or a class that takes other class or other function as an argument. So basically inside our decorator, in this case, we are going to be passing an element, right? So the decorator that we want to employ is something like this. We want to employ something like called maybe resource checker. Then we'll pass the model, right? So inside this one, so in this case the model that we're going to pass is called customer, right? So inside this resource checker, what this means is the resource checker will do the checking for us if this data is available. Then if it's not, then the resource checker will actually go ahead and handle it, right? So let's implement the resource checker. So since we're going to pass an argument, right, so which means we need a nested decorator whereby we need to implement a function that takes another function that takes another function. So it's going to be nested into 3 functions, right? So if it was not taking an argument, normally you'd implement only 2 functions, right? So now let's implement this resource checker. So here I'm going to say resource checker like this, right? Then this one, it takes a model. It's just a parameter name, right? Then inside this one I need to implement let's say a check entity function, right? This is another nested function, right? So then this one, it takes the function now, right? So what this does is it takes the function. Then we can, since it is a nested function, we can actually go ahead and implement something called reps, right? Then you put your function around it. But now with this reps, right, is you need to import the reps from the function tools, right? So what we're simply going to do here is we're going to say from func tools import reps, like so, right? So this is more or less like a wrapper function that is going to wrap our decorator function. So what we're simply going to do here is we're simply going to say def, then we'll declare another function, let's say called inner function, right? Then this inner function is going to take some arguments, right? And then some keyword arguments, right? Right. So what this now inner function is going to do is this is going to implement our try except things, right? So let's simply go ahead and define a function called x, right? Then we simply want to run the function. So this is now we want to run the function. So the function that we are running here is we are now running this get request function, right? So instead of doing this try catch, we no longer do it here, because this is now being handled by our decorator in that try that we just put just now. So right, so which means right, our decorator is now going to actually run this one. So let's pass the arguments, right, and then the keyword arguments, right, if we have any, right? So we now want to run this function, then we return whatever the result of this function is, right? So if there's an error in running our get request or our put request, what do you want to do? We want to actually accept, right? In this case, the exception that we are accepting is the model name dot does not exist. Okay, does not exist exception, right? So inside this exception, what we simply do here is we simply return the response, right, with a message, right? So the message that we're simply going to pass is called let's say resource not found or whatever, right? This is just a message, right? Then we simply go ahead and pass the status, right? The status, which are REST framework status dot http with a status of 204, which means no content, right? So all right, so here we are simply running our function, right? Then we return the result of our function, right? So this function that we're calling func, right, that we've passed here in our check entity is simply this function here, right? The get requests, be it the get request, the put, or the delete request that we're going to implement shortly, right? So once we have run this, right, then the next thing that we probably need to do here is to return, right, because we now want to return it as we go outwards. So we'll return the inner function, right, and then lastly we return the check entity. So this is simple. This is how we implement a decorator. So what this decorator does is it actually runs our request. Then if there's an error, then it returns the response error to the client. That's all. So now we don't need to worry about if this primary key does not exist, because this decorator is going to handle it since we have passed the decorator above this function name, right? So this is how a decorator works. So I think I will do another tutorial on decorators and some advanced Python features. So if you would want me to do that, just let me know in the comment section below. All right, let's continue. So now, now that we've got the customer, right, then we need to serialize, because we need to return that customer back to our client. So we are simply going to say customer serializer. We have already implemented the customer serializer. Then we simply pass the customer, right? So in this case, not the customer, this is the customer, the variable, right, like so. Then we simply return our response, right, like what we did earlier on. Then it's simply going to be serializer dot then the data. Then we're done, right? So this is our get request, right? So in this case, one thing that you probably notice is that in this customer serializer, we are no longer passing many is equals to true, like what we did for our get request here. The reason being is because here we are simply returning a single object, so we don't need to pass many is equals to true, right? So now let's probably move on to our put request, right? So for our put request is essentially we need to pass the data and then the ID, right? So the first thing that we probably need to do is to check if the customer exists, right? So remember, before we do that, we need to pass our decorator again, right? So I'm simply going to say decorator, then we pass the entity name of the decorator, right? So we need to check if this one exists, right? So if this one exists, then we serialize the data now, right? So we simply say serializer is equals to customer serializer, right? In this case, we're going to pass the data, because remember, remember, for our put requests, we need to pass the object that we want to modify, right? So and then update the existing one with the one that we have modified. So the one that we want to modify is this customer, right? We want to modify this customer. What do you want to modify it with? We want to modify it with the data that we're getting from the client, right? So we want to modify it with the data that we're getting from the client using the requested data, right? So this is done. So if, right, so now let's do our cleanup. If this is valid, right, so if this is valid, what do you want to do, right? So if the serializer works, right, what do you want to do? We simply want to save the new data, right, and override the old data, right? Then we to respond to the client, right? Return, we respond to the client with the new data, right? With the new serialized data, right? Like so. Otherwise, we simply want to return a bad request error, right? So do we have a bad request? This one. Let me simply go ahead and copy this and I paste it here. All right, serialized.error 400 bad request, like so. So this is our put request, right? So once we are done with our put requests, right, let's move on to our last CRUD feature, which is the delete, right? So the delete, use the delete function from our rests, from our API view, right? Then we pass the data, we pass the self, since we're in a class, the request, we pass the argument, format is equal to none, yada yada yada. The next, you know, same old, right? And then since when we want to delete something, we first need to check if it's available. Then if it's not, we return an error. So right, we need to implement our decorator here. We annotate our function with the decorator, right? Once we have annotated our function, then the next thing that we need to do is we need to get the customer. So I'm simply going to copy and paste this, right? So we get the customer. If the customer is available, then let's go ahead and delete it, right? Boom, delete, right? Once we delete the customer, then we return our response. So the response that we need to return to the customer is equal to status, right? With status, we're simply going to return maybe let's say a 204. Yep, a 204, no content, meaning the request was successful and they get nothing since it is deleted. So if there's an error, again the decorator will be run and then it will return the message not found, which means the ID that we have probably passed, the entity, the published entity of that one does not exist, right? So now let's save it, right? So once I save it, right, let's go back to our Python, right? Our environment is running, there are no errors, right? So which means we're good to go. So now let me try to get to write a get request that gets this this thing, right? So let me say customers.get one, right? So in this case we have nothing. Let's see, boom. Because what this one is supposed to do is it's simply supposed to return it's supposed to return the 404, this message not found, because we don't have anything as of yet. So let's see our API, right? Customers / all right, I need a / here at the end, right? I forgot to put a /. So about that, guys. Let me clear the terminal, right? Let me rerun that request, right? Boom. All right, so probably it's returning it, but it's not displaying. This is because I think kel doesn't display. So I think we'll try this in Postman so that you can actually see the response that is being returned. All right, so before probably we try with Postman, remember in our models, in our business model, right, we had a user, that we're using. So for example, we said created by, then user default is equals to 1. So we need to create this user because as it stands right now, we don't have a user. So to create a user, you simply let's go back to our Python, right? And let's terminate the server. So we're simply going to say manage.py, right? Create. In this case, I'm simply going to create a super user, right? Create super user, right? Then the super user, I'm going to say admin. Then the email address, I'll pass my email address at Gmail. And then the password, I'll simply put a password, right? Right. All right. So now that I've created a super user, right? Let me run my server again. Right. Boom. Right. So now that the server is running, let's quickly go ahead and navigate to Postman and test our request. Right. So the first request that we need to test is we want to get everything, which means the get all. Right. So boom, I'll try it. Right. So again, this one is working. It's returning a list of an empty array, which means there's nothing. Right. Then I want to try and get a single user, right? Like this. Right. And then it's now returning the message not found. Right. So which means our API is working. So before I do other requests, let me try to make a post request. Right. So I want to make a post request. Remember, for our post request is on slash, right? The post request is on slash, right? So let me simply say post, right? Then inside the body, I have some details that I've captured here, right? Then let's make this post request. All right, so this post request, I think it has worked because it has returned us with the data, with the ID. Remember, for a post request, it returns the data to the user, then created by, and etc. Right? So the post request is working. So now let's try to make a get request, right? A get request that will actually go ahead and gets everything, right? Okay, so it's working. As you can see, it's now a list of objects. So in this case, we have one object. Then let's try to get the first one with ID 1, right? So let's see. All right, so it's working with ID 1. So we can actually see that our RESTful API is working. So let's try 2. We know that 2 does not exist as of yet. So not found, right? So which means our API is working. So if we try a delete requests, I think if we try to delete number 2, and it's not working, right? And then if you try, let's try to delete the first one, right? Supposed to return a 2 or 4. So here, if you see under the status here where my mouse is, it's now saying 2 or 4, no content, right? So from this stage, it actually means that our requests are working, right? So as of this stage, the client was simply be able to make the requests, right? But these requests were not secured. That's one thing that you can probably notice. So now the next thing that we now want to look at is to actually go ahead and make sure that all these views, so let me go back again to the views, make sure that all these views or all these endpoints that we're hitting are secured. So with that said, I'll see you in the next one. Stay tuned.